Okay, so I'm going to do a brief vlog of a sort of summary of the actual blog on my website concerning Atlantis and Plato's clues. So, I don't think I have to explain the history of Atlantis. I think we all know it supposedly disappeared overnight, sank into the ocean, something happened to it. It existed, and now it doesn't, supposedly. So, what I am going to do is try to give a brief history of our understanding of it. Basically, the first written record we really have of it is from Plato. He had this habit of writing down what he heard from others. He wrote down the dialogues of conversations. So, this is why we have writings of Socrates, what Socrates said, because Socrates was Plato's teacher. And it's not that Socrates wrote these things down, it's that Plato wrote them down. That's our first reference of Atlantis, is a conversation supposedly had where Plato is describing what he's hearing. He's describing what is being described in the conversation that he's listening to. And in that conversation, he is hearing this adventurer, this philosopher, this person describe having gone to Egypt, and the Egyptians were the ones who had the history of what they claim is their origin, Atlantis. So already in Plato's telling of Atlantis, what we have from Plato, we have a retelling of an oral history. So we have a visitor, someone from Greece, going to Egypt. So we already have an issue with potential language barriers here, potential mistranslations, misinterpretations, whatever you want to call it. You have someone from one country going to another and being told the backstory of the people of that country, basically. So who knows how much was left out, how much was embellished, how much was mistranslated. You've already got problems. And in this conversation, this person is saying, the Egyptians say, hey, this happened years and years ago. Our civilization is so much older. And the telling of Atlantis is not as detailed about what actually happened to it, so much as it is that, it was grand, it was technologically advanced, it resided out in the true ocean. Now this is where it gets a little interesting, and what people are basing their search for Atlantis off of. They're basing their search for the location of Atlantis off of the clues that Plato has written, off of this conversation that he's overhearing. May or may not be overhearing. This may be a fictional conversation. This may be a dialogue between two characters he invented. So anyway, according to Plato's clues, you have to leave the Mediterranean. He makes this very clear. There's no room for interpretation here. So, yes, the Mediterranean is full of sunken cities, and the water levels have risen, and you can find all kinds of archaeological treasure troves in the Mediterranean. Atlantis is not in the Mediterranean. Plato makes this very clear. You have to leave the Mediterranean, and even back in his day, they knew the difference between a sea and an ocean. You have to go out to the true sea, the true ocean. You have to go out to the ocean, past the Strait of Gibraltar, the Pillars of Hercules. Everyone is pretty clear that the Pillars of Hercules means the Strait of Gibraltar. We're all pretty much in agreement there. So you have to go beyond that and out into the Atlantic Ocean. That would be the true sea. It's much, much bigger than the Mediterranean. So anyone who's searching for Atlantis in the Mediterranean is already off to a bad start. Furthermore, Plato says you need to go north. This is important because he's telling us which direction to go, which north, even back in his day, would have been the same north as today. Probably even back in the time period that he's talking about when Atlantis supposedly sank. It still probably would have been the same north. And I say probably because there is, the theory that the North Pole has changed. It has moved location, so north, as we know it today, may not have always been north. But for this argument, the way Plato is describing it and what Plato would have considered north would be the same north as of today. So north would be north. That means that Atlantis is probably not in or around or under Bermuda, probably not in or around or under Antarctica, probably not in and around and amongst the Azores Islands. It's probably north. Now, again, another clue we have that helps us out here is Plato is describing an archipelago. He's describing islands within islands, islands that Poseidon supposedly smashed together. He's telling us that there are outer islands and that they surround another island, a larger island, and in the center of that island is like basically a lake, and in the center of that would be Atlantis on an island in that lake. That's more or less what he's describing. Again, I'm summarizing. I give much more detail and quotations from his writing in the blog itself, but I'm trying to make this video as quick and painless as possible here. So, he's describing an archipelago in which lies a lake, in which lies another island, and that's Atlantis. All of the islands, all of the continent, all of it is Atlantis. But the actual city of Atlantis supposedly is on that island, in that lake, surrounded by the other islands. The larger island, which is surrounded by smaller islands all smashed together. That's an archipelago. And the reason I am putting emphasis on this is because some people have supposed that Atlantis might be in Portugal, in Spain, on the coast somewhere. Well, again, the water levels have risen. Even today, those areas would be considered part of the continent, not an island. Even with the higher water levels, we haven't turned them into an island. And back in Plato's time, there would have been more continent. They would have been more inland than they are now. So I think we can pretty much rule out those locations as well. So that leaves us with an archipelago to the north. An archipelago to the north, surrounded by other islands or smaller islands along the way, but you have to keep going past those islands. That's another clue. And the actual main island, the large island that makes up the continent of Atlantis, that makes up the majority of the archipelago, it has a mass that is larger than Turkey and Libya combined. Another big clue here, because that's pretty sizable. And if you want to compare surface areas, I have done that. I have shown photos and stuff in the blog. It's all there in the blog in more detail, but the only archipelago that I could find in that direction, surrounded by islands, that meets all that criteria is Greenland. Greenland's perfect. Greenland's north. Greenland's an archipelago. And if you remove all of the ice, Greenland would look like this big mass of two sort of crescent islands, if you will, with a smaller island in the center and a lake and all that. And then the exterior, more islands. More islands mashed together. Furthermore, there is a description about being protected by mountains. Beyond the mountains, you have a plain. So this also fits Greenland if you remove the ice. Basically, you would have the exterior, which is actually where the majority of the population lived. This flowering exterior, flowering florets, harbors. That also matches another description Plato gave, the way that the exterior had sort of flowering harbors. And then you would hit the mountains. And once you get to the other side of the mountains, that's where you have your plains. Plato also describes the plains leading to the interior, the lake with the island in the middle. This all fits perfectly with Greenland. You just need to remove the ice. And remember, 80% of Greenland is unexplored because of the ice. You know, one of the main arguments for searching for Atlantis in Antarctica is that Antarctica is covered in ice. Atlantis could be under the ice. Well, 80% of Greenland's unexplored and covered in ice. Antarctica isn't the only location that could be concealing Atlantis beneath ice. Especially if Atlantis was the island that sank in the center of that lake in the middle of Greenland and then was frozen over with ice. There's a reasonable argument to be made here. Now, some of the clues that might seem contradictory to this argument would be things like the elephants. Okay. But let's remember, we found mammoths frozen in the tundra, so obviously it's not completely impossible. You could have mammoths that might have been described as elephants rather than mammoths. I don't believe they called them mammoths in Plato's time. That could explain that. In the blog, I also give a couple other alternative theories. If you don't want to subscribe to the whole Atlantis is in Greenland, under Greenland, beneath Greenland, somewhere in Greenland theory, I do give some alternative theories due to the fact that it's really not much to go on. Plato only mentions it briefly in that dialogue, and again, the clues could have been mistranslated, embellished, could have been, you know, just folklore made up by the Egyptians. We don't know. It's almost impossible to trace this origin of this story. So, really, it could have come from civilizations predating the Egyptians, civilizations that became the Egyptians. You know, they could have had this origin story of they were the descendants of Atlantis and this is what they went through. And it could have been something, you know, from the Sumerians, it could have been something from the Babylonians, it could have been something even from India. You know, India's got its own stories of ancient, advanced civilizations and gods warring and sunken cities and Dwarka and all of that. So we really don't know where the original story came from prior to Plato hearing about this, and how much of it was changed and what we're still missing. But based on Plato's clues, and based on some maps and some images, again, not sure exactly how accurate those are, just in general, we could make a solid argument that Atlantis might have been all of the islands that make up Greenland. And specifically the sunken city itself could have been there in the center. It could have been the island in the center. Now, I don't know if that island is still an island under all that ice, or if the water levels rose and swallowed the island up, so now you just have the lake in the middle under all that ice. I guess that's something to contend with there for any potential expeditions. It would be difficult, but not impossible if we wanted to explore that possibility. So anyway, check out my blog for all the details. I believe the blog is titled, actually I can look at this up right quick. I don't remember the title. It is The Search for Atlantis. And yeah, check it out. Leave a like, comment, all that good stuff. Let me know what you think.